Okay.
Yes.
Hello, everyone, and my dear guests. Welcome to the Importance of the Food Waste and Food Loss webinar session at the Force. I am Gaye Sahin. I'm a food editor / writer. And I have a great guest here with me today for this session. We have Ylva Johannesson. She's a sustainability consultant. We have Elif Arabacıoğlu, quality assurance and sustainability manager at Metro Cash and Carry Turkey. And we have Ayşe Yılmaz, founder of beautiful Ottan Studio. We have Brian Lipinski, associate WRI Food Program.
Hi, my name is Brian Lipinski. I'm with the World Resources Institute based in Washington, D.C., and I'm part of our food program. And I am especially focused on the topic of reducing food loss and waste.
Brian, my first question for you is, according to an article published on 2018 at WRI blog, there is a big shortfall between the amount of food we produce today and the amount needed to feed everyone in 2050. There will be nearly 10 billion people on Earth by 2050, about 3 billion more mouths to feed than there were in 2010. So feeding 10 billion people sustainably by 2050 then requires closing too many gaps. So according to these data, how do we feed 10 billion people and how do we create a sustainable food future for 2050?
Yes, thank you for that question. Indeed, we do need to really think about how we're going to be able to sustainably feed the planet, not just in 2050, but even now, because the way that we're producing food is already unsustainable. And if we extrapolate that out to 2050, it's only going to become even more unsustainable. And as you referenced, there are those three gaps: the food gap, the land gap, and the GHG gap. And so in terms of how we close all three of those gaps, it really is a question of making sure that we are doing a little bit of everything. You know, there's no silver bullet. There's no one strategy that's going to close all three gaps. And in fact, some pieces are going to be more effective at closing some parts of those gaps than others. So, for example, reducing food loss and waste actually manages to have some effect on each one of those gaps because it can reduce food demand for the future. It can save land because less food needs to be produced if we're making better use of what's already being produced. And it also reduces some GHG emissions because we don't need to produce as much food and therefore don't have as many associated greenhouse gas emissions. Some other strategies are going to be more effective at closing one of the gaps than the others. So for example, reducing meat consumption, especially red meat consumption, things like beef especially, that's going to have an especially profound effect on closing that GHG gap and isn't going to have as much effect on closing the food gap, because in that case, we're more looking at the massive greenhouse gas implications of meat production. So really, there's no one strategy that gets us closing all of those gaps between now and 2050. Instead, it's much more about doing things at every single stage of the food supply chain, both on the supply side and the demand side. So it's, you know, closing the yield gap, making sure that farms are being as productive as possible. On the consumer side, it's making sure that people aren't being wasteful with their food and they're eating lower on the food chain. And everywhere in between, you've got those little interventions that, although they might only do a little bit to close that gap, when it adds up all together, it creates the change that we need.
My second question is, what is the proposal of 10-20-30 food loss and waste initiative? And which firms from the globe and from Turkey have signed to engage their supply changes?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. The 10 by 20 by 30 initiative is really exciting. And the idea is that we're working with 10 of the world's largest food suppliers, at least 10 of the world's largest food suppliers, companies like Migros in Turkey, Walmart, Sodexo, Carrefour, and many others. And then those companies are inviting 20 of their priority suppliers within their food supply chains to participate in this initiative, hence the 10 by 20 by 30, which is aiming to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030, in line with the Sustainable Development Goal, Target 12.3, which also is aiming to cut food waste in half by 2030. And so the purpose here is to really try to scale up action to reduce food loss and waste across the entire food supply chain. Because you do have a lot of companies that are working on their own and doing some really great work to reduce food loss and waste. But in this way, it becomes much more systematic and works within those existing networks between the suppliers and the retailers. And so the idea is that participants engage in what's called the Target, Measure, Act approach, where they set a target to reduce their food loss and waste, cut it in half by 2030. They measure. They begin measuring what's happening within their own operations in terms of the amount of food loss and waste that's occurring, amongst what sorts of commodities and what's causing that food loss and waste. And then they act. They take steps to actually reduce that food loss and waste, doing things like training staff, altering manufacturing processes, altering harvesting processes, these sorts of things to reduce food loss and waste. And then it's a cycle where you keep learning over time, you keep measuring and keep implementing new changes to make improvements over time. And what we find is that actually most companies are profitable in doing so. So in a study that we conducted along with our colleagues at the organization WRAP, we found that companies that are putting money into reducing food loss and waste see a 14-to-1 return on their investment on average. So it's not just about doing something good for the planet, but it's about doing something better for your bottom line as well. And so the 10 by 20 by 30 initiative is really trying to scale up that sort of action.
And my last question is, on the one hand, NGOs like WRI are working for the create a better sustainable world. On the other hand, humankind consuming natural resources rapidly. If every single person and every company, every government adopts a sustainable life that respects nature and consumes respectfully, could the world's natural resources have a chance to be enough for the future generations?
Yeah, so that's a big question about if everybody does their part, do we actually get to a more sustainable future? And, you know, it's hard to say for 100% certain, you know, how much everyone needs to do to achieve a sustainable future and who needs to do it. It gets very complicated very quickly, as we've talked about. But I think we have to try. You know, we certainly have to make our best effort because there's no other option. We've got this one planet, we've got this set of resources that we have, and we have to be able stewards of it. We have to make sure that we are protecting the resources that we have so that they can continue to sustain human life for well beyond the current time frame. So right now, I don't feel like we're achieving that. I think we're taking more than is our share. But I'm optimistic that over time, we will learn how to be more in tune with nature and move back towards a more sustainable approach. Because I think we've seen some encouraging progress. I think we've also seen that we're probably not doing enough just yet. So the optimist in me wants to think that we're going to get back there. But of course, the part of me that's been working on this for as long as I have understands that there's a lot more work that we need to do. So certainly it's an admirable goal for us to reach that level where everybody's reached a more sustainable approach to life. I'm hopeful we can get there and that it will be enough. I guess time will tell.
I don't want to waste any time as well, so I'll start with Ylva first. Ylva, you developed guidelines for startups and you provided sustainability advice to over 400 hospitality businesses. And you are working in industrial leading businesses and organizations, and each and every part of this chain is really important for the solutions that we are looking for. So I want to ask you, as your advices will be golden for all of us, I think, because private sectors, governments, and everyone, individuals, everyone is really important on this matter. So I'd like to ask you, what are your advices for this?
Sure. Yes. No. It's a good opening questions, I think, and a very broad question. So I'll try to answer it as succinctly as possible. So, firstly, I think for food waste reduction strategies to be successful, we will have to work collaboratively towards reducing food waste and loss. I think it will require all these actors and sectors to play their part. So essentially, we need an integrated systems change approach to this. And so reducing food waste can be a triple win. It saves money for farmers, for companies, for households. By wasting less, we have an opportunity to feed more people, and it will also reduce the sort of natural resources pressures such as water, land, and climate change, of course, as well. So I think there's an all-round sort of like win-win solution to reduce food waste. So I think if we look at government level first, I think the governments have a responsibility to create a level playing field, so the same rules apply to everyone, including clear regulations and policies preventing food loss and waste. And I think action will depend on where in the world you are. In developing countries, we see most of the food loss and food loss is happening at harvest. So they will need sort of proper education and help with to prevent post-harvest loss, storage, etc. Whereas in the developed world, the food waste happens at marketplace or in the home. So I think depending on which sort of national government you are, you need to look at specifically what is happening in each and every country. So if you start from the top, at global level, we have the SDGs. So specifically SDGs 12.3 sets a clear target to halve per capita food waste by 2030. So we have not even 10 years now to meet that target. And it's important to note that this isn't a legally binding target, and it does not directly address harvest loss. So there's certainly things that can be improved in that target, but it's a really good sort of global standard to work towards. And we've seen sort of countries such as the United Kingdom has been the first country to actually get more than halfway to meeting this target by reducing their food waste and loss by 27% year on year. And we also seen companies such as Tesco's, Campbell and Arla Food who have achieved reduction targets of more than 25%. So at least this is suggesting that achieving these targets is possible for both companies and governments. And at EU level, the European Commission is actually proposing a number of steps to reduce food waste across the EU, including legally binding targets. And I think that will be needed. And I think that would be a really good step, because then obviously governments will have to adhere to these targets and will have to act on these targets. And they will include things like improving date marketing of food products, because that's still confusing for consumers, and a lot of food is being thrown away despite it being edible, because it has a label on it saying that it's out of date. And I think on sort of national, regional and local government level, there's a lot of measures that can be put in place, like I mentioned before, depending on where in the world you are. I think national governments have a really big responsibility to really address what's happening sort of at regional and local level as well. So ensuring that they provide the right infrastructure to prevent food waste in the first place, to help redistribute edible food, and to have appropriate facilities to recover food waste, such as composting facilities, allowing surplus food to be fed to animals where appropriate, and things like that. So I think lastly, I just want to mention the nationally determined contributions, which are addressing the climate targets of the Paris Agreement, and they are being revised this year. And I think there was a report by WWF this year saying there's a huge opportunity to include food waste in those targets. And currently there's only 11 countries mentioning food loss, whilst no single country is mentioning food waste. And we know that food waste and loss has a huge contribution to greenhouse gases. If food waste was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter after China and the US. So we've seen, there's a lot of actions that can be done in those national sectors. And I think, from an individual level, I think there's a lot of things that can be done as well.
This is the most important, actually.
Yeah, and I think the reason I went from sort of from government to individual is I think governments, they do have campaigns, they have education campaigns, but also supporting in terms of date labels and things like that. And I think consumers have to change the behavior, but often if you don't have the sort of education and knowledge behind it, it can be difficult to do so. I don't really think consumers want to waste food on purpose, because obviously it's something that they've paid for already. And I think we could all perhaps take a note or two from our grandparents, how to preserve food, in terms of techniques such as pickling and canning and fermenting, and knowing what to freeze and what not to freeze. And you're just using common sense, using our noses and eyes and taste buds to actually get to know the food that we've cooked and bought. And proper storage, making proper shopping lists so we don't sort of overbuy and things like that. I think those are like simple things.
As well, we always expect to buy the most beautiful, most shiny fruits, but it doesn't mean that it's the most healthy. I mean,
exactly.
So maybe change our view about that.
Exactly. And I think that's a really good point. And coming into sort of like the businesses, what they can do. And I think as consumers, we do continuously expect having full supermarket shelves all the time. And that will mean the supermarkets are going to have to some extent waste the food, because it's not really possible to have full shelf all day long without having any surplus food. So I think we have to sort of change our mindset a little bit and perhaps be okay with not finding our favorite food and perhaps being able to pick something else instead. And I think in terms of businesses, particularly retailers, I think they are still wasting quite a lot of food. And I know that countries such as France, for instance, have implemented the huge fines for companies. So they need to redistribute food that is edible instead of wasting it. And personally, I mean, I worked a lot with hospitality businesses, and there's a lot of things you can do there. I mean, firstly, as consumers, as customers, we can make sure that if we can't come to the restaurants, we cancel our reservation. So there are no shows, because that definitely contributes to food waste in restaurants, and also loss of income for restaurants. So I think that's a really sort of simple thing that consumers can do. And then looking at where in the restaurant it's happening, whether that is prep waste, so maybe we need some chef training, maybe it's plate waste, so maybe you need to look at portions, or maybe it's happening at storage, so you need to sort of look at the sort of inventory systems that you have. And there is research saying, like, average restaurants, for every $1 they invest in food waste reduction, they will save $7 for that, whereas other businesses can save up to $14. So there's quite a lot of return on investment.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'd like to continue with Elif Arabacıoğlu. Elif, my first question for you: as Metro Cash and Carry Turkey, you are operating different projects to reduce food waste and food loss. So you conducted research with TÜBİTAK, and you revealed reasons for the losses and the wastes, which is really important, and particularly in fruit and vegetables, I think.
Yes.
So what are the results and how can we use those results? And what are you doing with results, first of all, of course, and how can we use them as well?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Food loss and waste is one of the main sustainability issue which is concerned in all over the world. If we show the risk with figures, approximately 1.3 billion tons of food is lost in various stages of the supply chain. We as Metro believe that the prevention of food losses is key in terms of food safety and hunger, environmental impact of the food industry, and also economy. In Turkey, approximately 49 million tons of fruits and vegetables are produced every year. It's estimated that between 25% and 40% of them are lost due to poor conditions during the supply chain from harvest to exhibition. Metro believes that the scientific-based approach is very valuable for food loss and waste struggle. For this reason, we started a scientific research project in cooperation with TÜBİTAK, who is the most reliable research institute of Turkey in 2016. The project is reducing the loss and waste of fruits and vegetables in Turkey. The aim of this project is to measure the loss rates in fruits and vegetables during all stages from harvest to exhibition, and to reduce the losses by encouraging good practices in the sector. This project is a first in Turkey since there is no scientific assessment studies on food losses in Turkey. In the project, lettuce, peach, and tomato are chosen as sample products. Poor and good condition practices were identified that have a negative impact and positive impact on the product quality. The impact of good and poor conditions at different stages of the supply chain were measured by TÜBİTAK researchers. We received tangible data about the impact of each practices on food quality and loss rates. The results indicate that a scientific amount of food loss can be prevented if the necessary investments for good supply chain practices are made, such as harvesting at proper maturity of the fruits and vegetables, using packaging that prevents humidity loss, keeping the cold chain in all transportation process, cooling the environment of display area great the benefits to reduce the losses. The result of the project was shared with the official authorities. After that, a legal regulation was published by the Minister of Customs and Trade about the procedures, principles, and standards practices in wholesale and retail trade of vegetables and fruits in 2017. Our project formed basis of this legal regulation. To take the project one step further, we decided to measure the amount of food waste in consumers. In this context, in order to define the stages with the highest amount of waste in HoReCa industry, we started the project in 2018. In this project, we measured the amount of waste in all stages from menu planning to the plates served to the customer in 3 different HoReCa sector, which are 1 all-inclusive hotel, 1 restaurant, and 1 boutique hotel. In the end, the results show that the highest amount of waste in all 3 places was generated by leftover food on the plate going to the waste. It is more than 50%. The second highest rate waste is coming from the production storage area due to insufficient storage space during the production phase, or not being able to estimate the number of customers. This research shows that we need a 360-degree holistic perspective to reduce the food loss and waste. There are many areas open to improvement in stages such as menu planning, determining plate or portion size according to the customers, and order and storage management.
Okay, thank you so much, Elif. And Ayşe, my next question is for you. I want to know all about Ottan Studio. So you're designing and producing furniture by using food waste products, which is amazing to me. And I know that you use leaves or grass or any kind of that. So how you come up with this idea, first of all?
Actually, in the beginning, the idea was to protect the beauty of nature, and it was like giving a second chance to the peels of an orange, for example, before they rot away. Then I found out there is one more reason behind this. I was a design student, and I was always looking for some beautiful materials to design with. But I had to consume virgin materials anyway to produce the product I design. Whatever I do, I always have to consume something to produce. But this is what I do, and this is what I want to do, and I need to find a solution for this. And I always believed that those peels, shells, and the leaves on the ground, they're valuable. So why don't we make those resources in front of us, a material for everyone to design while playing the colors and textures of nature, and as well as protecting virgin resources. And this is how the journey creates Ottan Studio began. It's all about those questions. I don't know how can I detail it more. It's
fine.
Maybe
we'll continue more.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll continue with you as well. Ylva, my second question for you is, you've debated food policy issues as a part of the European Commission, am I right? So does food waste and loss was included, and what decisions have been made about food loss and food waste?
Yeah, there was a few years ago I was there. So there's actually been quite a lot of action in the last couple of years in the EU. So it's estimated that 20% of the total food produced in the EU is lost or wasted, while 33 million people cannot afford a quality meal every second day. So it's obviously a key topic to address. So some of the initiatives are outlined in something called the Platform for Food Losses and Food Waste, which was a revised report in 2019. So I recommend anyone who's interested in what's going on having a look at that. So for instance, also the Farm to Fork strategy, which is a really comprehensive call to action on a food systems approach, was published in April this year. And that includes some clear targets addressing food waste and loss. And as I mentioned before, including legally binding targets and revising date label marketing, but also integrating food loss and waste prevention in other EU policies, which is something we've talked a bit more as well, like everything's integrated, climate agreements and things like that. Food waste does add to those targets as well. Something that I think is really interesting is it's called the Unfair Trading Practices Directive, which was launched in April last year. And this is addressing sort of small operators and farmers who often do not have enough bargaining power to defend themselves against larger businesses and contracts. So this will improve farmers and small and medium-sized businesses' position in the food supply chain. So EU has adopted legislation that bans certain unfair trading practices, including late payments for perishable food products, last-minute order cancellations, and returning unsold or wasted products. So EU countries now have 2 years since April 2019 to make this directive into their national laws. So I think that's a really great change and should hopefully hinder some of these harvest loss of changed agreements, meaning that full harvest are just left in the field to rot. And on the consumer side, as part of the Horizon work the EU has done is something called Refresh, which has looked at guidance for interventions, including evaluations, because there's been a lack of evaluation of consumer studies. So then it's difficult to know what works or what doesn't work. The key recommendations are to have national policy intervention to increase the skills of consumers for food management, and also campaigns that are appropriate for the country, and also ensuring that policymakers consider interventions based on regulation, economic instruments, and nudging approaches as well. So there's a whole sort of package around that Refresh approach that can be implemented on a national level.
Which is a good news, I think. I'm really happy.
Yes, I think so. I mean, we all know that whilst the EU is sort of seen as one big platform, the differences between my native Sweden and Turkey, for instance, are quite different. So I think it's you know, the UK is obviously ahead of the game in terms of some food waste practices and things like that. So I think we can also learn from each other, I think.
Exactly. Thank you very much. And Elif, my next question for you is meat traceability and fish traceability were carried out by Metro Cash and Carry Turkey for the first time, I think. So this is really important as well. And I want to ask you about the importance and purpose of this project. And maybe you should talk about the traceability itself as well. What is it? What do you mean by meat traceability and fish traceability, and why this is too important for us?
Okay. Actually, sustainability is main agenda topic of Metro in all over the world, and in Turkey as well. As you know, that Metro is a German company. As a responsible company, firstly, we focus on environmental impact of our assortment and our own operations. We have many different sustainability policies and targets about the deforestation to reducing carbon footprint, water usage, to conservation of the biodiversity. Traceability is also one of them. By integrating traceability into supply chain processes, we ensure the food safety and quality of our products and support protection of species. With this approach, we ensure transparency in the supply chain and encourage customers to consume responsibly. Customers can easily access the traceability information through the life cycle of their products, especially for meat and fish. Within the scope of the Red Meat Traceability Project, started in 2014, we achieved our goal of 100% traceability for store meat production in 2018. In this context, QR barcode put on the label of in-store meat products, such as mincemeat or any other meat products, when the customers scan the barcode via their smartphones, they can reach many information such as slaughterhouse, approving veterinarian, slaughter date, and packaging information. Another traceability.
All the journey.
Yeah, all the journey of the product. Our another traceability project is about the GS1 128 barcode standard for the traceability of meat. We can able to transfer the meat traceability information onto invoices in 2019 via GS1 128 barcode for the first time in Turkey.
Earth, there's no planet B. So I don't know, maybe we can pack and go to another planet to ruin it as well. I don't know about that, what future holds, but of course I totally agree with you, and I want to ask you about it's obvious that we need to make better choices and better commitments and brave decisions. So what are your opinions about this, and what do you think? What do you think about these commitments that we need to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's true, there's probably another planet out there we could inhabit it and destroy as well, but I don't think we'll have time for that right now. So I think the commitments relate to taking a whole systems approach, which means decision makers will have to have a much better understanding of the whole food systems in order to make informed decisions about what they need to do. And I think we urgently need to address so many issues at once, including climate change, deforestation, biodiversity loss, soil health, and there's no time just to pick one of these and just focus on that. So I think this will require buy-in from the top, and also upfront investment from companies to survive long term. And we also need to move to a regenerative food system, not simply aim to be sustainable, meaning that we need to urgently repair the damage that we have already done. So I think commitments such as collaborating across sectors and also within sectors, and being more open and sharing of best practice can lead to reaching these targets quicker. And also setting science-based targets, something called a science-based target initiative, for instance, that also align with the Paris agreements, which is quite difficult targets to set for some companies, especially if you include scope 3 emissions, but also includes the emissions from your value chain. So for instance, if you serve meat, if you produce meat, that's obviously going to have a lot of impact. It'll be difficult. There's going to be a lot of reduction required. But I think that would be necessary in order to meet these Paris agreements. And also, like we talked about today, you know, setting clear food waste reduction targets in line with the SDGs and in line with EU targets. So I think the actions, the brave actions, are really, making informed decisions, really understanding why these decisions are being made and why they are needed. And also being responsible with new product development and marketing of products. We know that things like, you know, buy one, get one free can increase the amount of food that people buy, for instance. And also address issues around equality and food justice. There's been quite a lot of talk about that at the moment. So let's not forget the social side of the things that we're talking about, not just the environmental side. And I think just coming back to it again, like this, adopting a whole food systems approach is so important in order to understand where to start and then how it all interlinks with each other. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but if we can help each other, we can communicate clearly, inspire others on the journey, and tell these stories of how we did it, I think that's a really good step in the right direction.
Okay, thank you so much. We have too little time left, so my last question for Elif is, what are Metro Cash and Carry's future plans and projects?
Thank you for this question. Actually, as the part of our Metro Food initiative, we have a plan to preparing a guideline for restaurant and HoReCa professionals about how they can produce the food waste. And till end of the year, we plan to share it with our HoReCa industry.
Okay. Thank you so much. And Ayşe, my last question is for you as well. What are your future plans? And maybe you can add about, is it more sustainable to use the food waste products? Is it more convenience for you than wood and stone? I don't know. Maybe you can.
One day we hope Ottan will be a material that every designer uses and prefers. We believe that, so that it's possible to design our living spaces from kitchen to automobiles, tables to plates with nature in a way that we consume much less natural resources. So I think this is a sustainable way to use nature, use resources. In addition, now it's a luxury to furnish houses with natural wood and marble, and individuals who cannot afford it have no choice but to use furniture covered with plastic, which is away from nature. We aim to prevent this by upcycling organic waste and to bring the beautiful colors and textures of nature into everybody's homes. Apart from this, we're aware of a very serious situation, as we mentioned here, the climate crisis. And experts say that if we do not take a step today, our resources may be completely exhausted within 100 years. And in 2050, we will exceed a point where we cannot restore the world again. So in order to prevent this and make our dreams come true, we started collaborations with designers and architects from all over the world. Previously, we thought it would be beneficial to grow by operating in a single sector for Ottan to exist as a company. However, in line with the demands we received, we decided to change our business model a very short time ago, and now we're open to everyone who wants to design with Ottan materials and develop products. And if I need to give a little clue from our upcoming projects, I can say that the days when we will see Ottan on the tables are coming soon.
Okay.
Like that.
So much. Thank you all so much for joining me and for all your answers and everything. Thank you so much all.